Hi everyone, it's March 21st, 2024, and this is the Backdrop Weekly Developer Meeting. We get together every week to talk about priorities and technical issues that we're working through as the Backdrop community. My name is Nate Lampton. I'm Quick Sketch on the internet, calling in from Oakland, California, and I am a core committer and technical lead for the Backdrop project. We'll go to Joseph, and then we'll go to Eli.
Hi, my name is Joseph. I'm a developer from Las Vegas, Nevada, and a core committer. And yeah, I've been working on test framework stuff this week.
Great, thanks, Joseph. Eli, if you can do an introduction, then we'll go to Jen.
Hello, my name is Eli Lissick. I am a developer and I'm in San Diego, California.
Thanks, Eli. Jen, do you want to do an intro?
Sure. I'm Jen Lampton, joining from Oakland, California.
All right. I'm going to toss it back to you, Jen. Are you ready to do the little community update?
So we have a couple of exciting things this week. We have a new showcase website. The showcase website is called In Info Veritas, and the most exciting part is that it is a website that's helping teach people about Backdrop. So that's great. And then we also have a handful of new contrib modules this week. We have file hash and paragraphs aplenty. That's it for me.
Great. Just putting our YouTube link out there in the Zulip chat. All right. Let's see. We did have some issues that were brought up this week. We asked people to post to forum.backdropcms.org if there's anything that people would like to have brought up during these meetings. Indigo Zella posted two issues related to jQuery. So the first of which is, well, actually, both of these issues are related to her request to stop using deprecated functions throughout all of Backdrop, deprecated jQuery functions, and also to prepare for jQuery 4. So I'll share my screen real quick here to pull up what she's talking about here. So kind of the complaint slash question here is that there was a commit made in Backdrop 1.27.1 that was related to a security hardening, and so it didn't get a very well publicized issue because we pulled this in out of the security queue and into the public queue just like the same day as the release happened. Drupal decided that this issue, Jen, can you clarify for me? I think that they decided not to do anything for Drupal 7. Is that right?
Yeah, they decided that Drupal on its own was not exploitable, and so it wasn't a concern. But there are going to be no further updates to this library, and there is a public notice about the library having a vulnerability. So for Backdrop, we decided that it would be better to solve a potential theoretical issue rather than saying it's fine because it's in Backdrop.
Yeah, so this is the issue. There's an XSS issue in the jQuery form module, and this has been open for a long time, as you can see. And so this issue is already out here, and people know of it, but there's no support for this project anymore, it doesn't seem like. And so what this did is it mitigated the factor by defining this function. If parse JSON doesn't exist, then assign it to the browser JSON parse function, which is ironically what jQuery 4 basically says is that they removed this function, parse JSON, and said just use the browser-based JSON.parse instead. But where this was intended to mitigate is that very early versions of jQuery didn't have this function defined either, and that's how this jQuery forms security vulnerability can be exploited, is in combination with very early versions of jQuery. Since Backdrop's using a newer version of jQuery, though, this really shouldn't theoretically happen in the first place. But we did it anyway as a hardening measure. But IndigoZella is now saying, well, that's a problem because jQuery 4 doesn't have parse JSON either. And that when we literally added a deprecated function, for the scanning of deprecated code, this is going to pop up now as being, hey, you're using a deprecated function when you shouldn't be, when we've basically intentionally defined the deprecated function specifically to avoid some old security issue. So
Well, I think when we remove jQuery 1 from core, we can remove that workaround.
totally, yeah, that would be one thing. Honestly, our version of jQuery probably isn't, or definitely isn't vulnerable anyway, because this parse JSON function has always existed in the versions of jQuery that we use. So if you look at the parse JSON documentation, it was introduced in jQuery 1.4.1, which maybe not every version of Drupal 7 was always using. I don't know. Maybe Drupal 6, but
Well,
I mean,
Drupal
back,
also has the jQuery update module, which would, in theory, allow anyone to install any version of jQuery they wanted. So it's a little bit more, theoretically possible that somebody had locked to a specific version of jQuery that might still be containing that
yep.
old behavior.
So it brings up the question, like, what do we do about this? Like, can we remove it or do something different? Is there a different approach for this fix? I'm not quite sure where my head is yet on this. It was a security hardening in the first place. I'm halfway tempted to just say, maybe we should just take this back out. Drupal didn't do anything at all for this, and in theory, it's not even exploitable inside of Backdrop. So
I would go the other way and say, what's the harm of leaving it in? Like it's deprecated, but we're not using it in the way that's deprecated. It might be better to just leave the hardening and add a little exception for our code sniffer to ignore this.
yeah, well, it also gets into this other question of like, okay, when we add jQuery 4, uh, this function actually will stop being here again, and so actually this will reapply, and then jQuery forms actually will be using this parse JSON
Well,
because that's the way.
not if this was only loaded for the versions of jQuery where it was needed.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Right? Like
yeah.
we could put a sniffer in that's like, we know what version of jQuery you're running because it's an option in core. Only add this when it's needed.
Yep. And that's so one thing that IndigoZella has done here is that she's defined a backwards compatibility file for jQuery 4. Like if you're running jQuery 4 to make existing code work, and we could in theory put like our parse JSON thing in here instead of in ajax.inc. We didn't have this file, or we don't have this file currently, but we could put it in here as a way of making that function always defined, and then it would be kind of version specific.
So this file makes jQuery for,
Oh, it's right
isn't
here,
it the
actually.
other way around?
It makes it so that jQuery 3 code can run on jQuery 4.
But don't we not want to include our code in jQuery 4? Isn't it
Right.
like the opposite? Like we only want to add this line if this file is not in use,
So,
right?
yeah, I
Or
mean,
do I have it backwards?
um,
Because we only need this for older versions of jQuery.
and for newer versions, ironically, because this function doesn't exist in jQuery 4 either. And so it's funny that this
Is
backwards compatibility file does the same fix as our fix for very old versions of jQuery, because this function didn't exist in very old versions of jQuery and it doesn't exist again in very new versions of jQuery. So The crazy thing is that if you are using jQuery 4, the jQuery forms library becomes vulnerable again.
Does it call this function?
Yes, it calls parse JSON.
So maybe when we update to jQuery 4, we switch it, like rather than changing the way we're doing jQuery, we update that forms library.
Yeah.
That could be
So
an option too, because that's
so
not going anywhere. And that might be a much easier long-term workaround than keeping changing what we're doing.
yeah, and that's the kind of the crux of all of this is that the jQuery forms library has not been updated in a long time. And that the best solution would be if the library just didn't have the vulnerability in it, and then we just switch to the updated version of the library, right? Like
Yeah.
we're doing all of these crazy hoops, like trying to make it so that we're not using deprecated code and that we're avoiding this code path that causes an XSS issue, and we're avoiding the code path by defining a deprecated function. And it's like really like if the library were just updated, didn't have this problem, then everything would be a lot simpler. We could totally ditch this whole thing, and we wouldn't be dependent upon this backwards compatibility file to make the forms library work. And so I think that's
Is
kind of the
that something
question
you'd be
here.
open to for Backdrop 2?
What?
To like fork jQuery forms
I'd
and
be open to it
maintain
in
that?
jQuery 1 or in Backdrop 1. Like
Really?
what like it's totally ridiculous like this little problem here. Like we don't I mean we fork it in a way that it's backwards compatible, right? So we would effectively make a 4.3.0, you know, dash, you know, 1, you know, like backdrop it,
Dash Backdrop 1.
forked version 1. Yeah, exactly. Um,
Okay. I did spend a considerable amount of time reaching out to previous maintainers of this project to try and figure out who is responsible for maintaining it currently, and they all came up on dead ends. So I don't think that there is anyone who has commit access to this project today who is reachable.
yeah. In
So
which
I
case,
think that this
I
is
kind of
officially
wonder, like,
dead, and then
yeah,
fork I think is reasonable.
yeah, like, can we fork this and put it? The thing is that I don't really want to commit us to being the maintainers of it, like us, the backdrop community. It would really be ideal if this responsibility was distributed to a new group of contributors that are interested in using this project.
How big
Joe,
is how
go
big
ahead.
is the change that we would have to make to jQuery forms?
Pretty
There's a
minimal,
pull
I think.
request. There's already a
Yeah,
pull
yeah,
request for it.
yeah. Actually,
You
that's a
could
good
just
point.
go
We
look
should
at
just look
the
at that. This, yeah,
That's it.
very
there,
small.
Oh,
there you go. So this is a, oh, actually, I thought that was test coverage. Yeah, so this is the code that has the security vulnerability in it, and it basically says if parse JSON doesn't exist, then it makes its own version of parse JSON, and it does it using window eval, which basically allows you to execute arbitrary JavaScript.
hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, this solution is kind of a little bit of a hack though, where it's just like it just doesn't work. It's
Throw an
just
error.
like too bad. Yeah, yeah, but really what it should, I mean, actually what this should do in order to make this jQuery 4 compatible is that it should just call json.parse, just like
And if we
jQuery
did
4
that,
recommends.
we could also make it dependent on jQuery 4, the next version. The next release of this project could have a dependency.
No, I don't think it needs to be dependent on jQuery 4. It could just be jQuery 4 compatible by not using this function, by using JSON parse instead.
Does JSON parse exist all the way back to jQuery 1 also?
JSON parse is provided by browsers, not by
And
jQuery.
okay.
And
I just
so,
I just
and,
checked
Is
and
there,
it's
go ahead,
what was
Joseph.
your question? I just checked and JSON.parse is supported as far back as Internet Explorer 8.
okay.
Yeah. So
that is
browser
good enough.
support is gonna, yeah, it's good enough. Yep. Yeah,
Great.
exactly. So this JSON parse was introduced, way earlier than that. I mean, jQuery 1.4 was probably Internet Explorer 6 era. But yeah, now it's not necessary. Just use the browser instead. So that would be the real fix here, is just use JSON parse here. Fork this project, start using JSON parse. Anyway, that's what I think would be the best solution. Would be like, stop trying to find ways to make this old code work with new code and just update the old code
Yes.
to be better.
Let's fork
Um,
it.
yeah, so this is interesting because this isn't the only library that is like this, though. There are these other 4 libraries that Indigo Gonzalez called out. There's the forms library, the cookie library, time entry, and tree table. Um, yeah, so she's saying maybe we just drop a couple of them, and if we drop them, that might be jQuery 2 things.
I mean, backdrop too.
Yes, sorry, backdrop 2 things. Yeah, so I kind of wonder for all of these, like, we're not alone in this situation. That's like, jQuery isn't as popular as it used to be, and a lot of people that wrote jQuery libraries are off writing other libraries now, and they're not maintaining their jQuery plugins that were widely adopted and used. But just because it's less popular doesn't mean it's not still enormously popular. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I'm fairly certain that jQuery is still the most popular JavaScript library in the world. It just has a very big long tail, but it's not being super well supported because the developer enthusiasm for it has waned. But it would be great if we could come up with some kind of solution here for all of these libraries. What do you do with a deprecated library that people are still using and still want to maintain, but the current maintainer is not interested or is just disappeared? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? No easy answers here.
I mean, I think like checking to see if there are more recent versions of these libraries, like updating them if there are would be the easiest thing. If there aren't, looking at how people are solving these problems today and seeing if there aren't more modern, simpler solutions than the way that we were
I
doing
think
it originally.
I think the new way of doing things is to use something like Vue or React and just use their tools.
Or
Yeah,
just use vanilla JavaScript in a lot
Yeah.
of cases.
and if vanilla JavaScript is considerably more complicated than using an existing library, then I think sticking with the libraries is probably the better way to go. But I mean, I don't know. I feel like if there is a vulnerability that comes up in one of these libraries, like we're not going to be the only people that are facing it. There's going to be other people who are going to, need to keep using it for a while, and we could probably, um, for example, benefit from the pull request that was filed against the jQuery form library. So,
Yep. I'll put in another one here. I should add a comment as well that the once library is also a library that we have an issue with. jQuery once is also kind of not maintained, but even separately, we have a problem in that we're using like the 1.x version of jQuery once, which is not API compatible with the newer version of jQuery once. But it's also effectively not maintained. Drupal moved to their own implementation of once. I'm not sure if it's a library or not, but I'm pretty sure it's just like it's a vanilla implementation of the same thing that jQuery once does. But we use jQuery once in like every behavior JavaScript file in all of core and all of contrib. And so that's why we've never moved to jQuery once too, because it would require every single JavaScript file in all of Backdrop to change. I think that's a great example of another library that maybe doesn't have security vulnerabilities right now and doesn't have compatibility issues, but it would be great if we had a version of jQuery once that was still compatible with what we're doing right now and was still maintained. And then we also could go through and update it if we needed to for security and for compatibility with jQuery 4. Yeah, so it's yet another library of, we need some solution for keeping these things maintained. Did I stop my share? My Zoom sometimes is inconsistent about
you're
this.
not sharing at the moment.
Okay, yeah, it just doesn't understand. Okay, great. Yeah, I feel like that's not conclusive, because exactly how we're going to manage that, I'm not sure. But that's what I think is the best path forward, is starting to maintain these jQuery libraries that have been abandoned. I'm not sure if that means like there's a new organization that we create on GitHub for all of them, or if we make a new group for each one of them individually. I kind of think that making one big group might be better, kind of like a, um, I don't know, jQuery LTS group or something like that. But it's possible that once we start maintaining these libraries, that people would actually like, there's a lot of feature requests potentially, and people would be like, no, we don't want you to just like maintain it to make it jQuery compatible, jQuery 4 compatible. We want to add new stuff to it too, because if we become, or this organization becomes the new definitive maintenance for each one of these libraries, then they could actually be developed as well. And I don't know if we have the appetite for that. Go ahead, Joseph. Were you going to say something?
I just two things. First off, it might be a good idea to name it in such a way where we can throw other libraries we decide to maintain in there. Like we have a bunch of other like PHP or JavaScript or CSS libraries that we might need to fork at some point in the future.
Well, I think if we started including PHP and CSS libraries, then it would kind of become a Backdrop specific repository of external libraries. I was kind of suggesting that we do this in a way that all of these other people that are using jQuery and these libraries could benefit from it as well.
Okay.
But it's not impossible, that people would start using Backdrop maintained libraries.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they
Yeah,
would just use
I've
our
seen that happen a
namespace for
bunch
it.
of time. I don't remember what the second thing I was going to say was.
Okay. So anyway, I'll post a comment at least to this issue that Indigozella has asked about. What to just do with these, what to do with these libraries. Maybe that's 6404, add jQuery 4.x as an additional option, and just discuss what we're going to do about these libraries. And we can continue discussing there. Okay, let's see, other topics. So 2277, swappable config storage. We've been making a little bit of progress on this. Joseph, you actually said that you spent some time on it, but you had bad news. So let's go ahead and hear it.
Okay. I'm going to go find the page. Okay. I'm going to screen share.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. So not over there. So the database tests in this script it appears the two that are failing both do a user login in the setup step, and it looks like it's failing to find any form fields, and and then it's further like it doesn't find any form fields or buttons on anything really. So I'm not sure what's going on with that, but it seems like the XPath is failing on loading forms. Um, and I don't know why that would be affected by any of the changes we had made. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing I noticed that so the 5.x, I tried switching it back to not using that abstracted out action you made,
Mm-hmm.
and the web server setup started working again. But I've also noticed that all of them return in about 20 to 25 seconds. And if you go in and look at these, the only output from running tests is just failed to find the config directory is empty.
Mm.
So it says it was successful, but it's returning an exception.
Oh, I see. So none of these are actually passing. So it's not just
Right.
5.6, it's actually everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I tried changing them back, and it does the same thing when I change it back to the other script. It says the config directory is empty.
Yeah. So I think that's again like there's something with the simple test setup that when running from the command line, it's not um, it's not doing the profile caching correctly.
Mhm. But
So
when
I
I
think yeah,
I
yeah.
run it on my local environment, it works just fine.
Yeah, yeah. This is kind of what I've been seeing too, that I'm there's something I'm struggling with specifically with the way that the tests are running inside of GitHub Actions that is different than what happens when I run it locally. And it
Mhm.
shouldn't be. It should just be, running the same command as we do locally, but I'm not quite sure what's happening here.
Yeah. So I don't
Well,
know.
this doesn't sound too bad, honestly. I thought you were going to say that you definitively found something that was going to make this impossible, but it sounds like it's just we're still stuck. Like we don't know that
But I mean,
it's not possible. It's just being challenging.
yeah, I've been beating my head on this for like a week and a half now, and I can't get any useful data out of the CI test. I have my another pull request where I've been just making minor tweaks and running it again and again, and I just never get any useful data out of it.
Yep, that's been my experience as well. That there's something here that is tricky.
So yeah,
Are you ready to give up on it, do you think? Like, are we needing to find some other people to research this?
I don't know. I ca- I really want it to get in because I want to use it on our server.
Yeah, yeah, I think it would be great to get in for sure if we can figure this out.
I had one thought, Nate, I think you mentioned that there are some Lullabout customers that are using Tugboat on GitHub Actions infrastructure. I was thinking if we could find some way to get the tests running on equivalent infrastructure where we can do them through the UI, we might be able to actually see what's going on and see if the infrastructure where the tests are running is part of the problem. Or because if it runs on all of the other environments without an issue, and that's the only place it fails, it could give us a clue.
Yeah, I so uh
Has that been done before, I guess is the question.
yeah, I mean what we're talking about is something different. Like you can use GitHub Actions to set up Tugboat, but then you'd be running on Tugboat and not on GitHub Actions. Like where we're having the failing right now is inside of GitHub Actions itself and
Right.
not with Tugboat or any other web server.
But only because it's running there from the command line, we can't actually see how it's failing. But if we could have it, like, rather than have Tugboat run on Tugboat servers, would Tugboat work on not Tugboat servers? I thought maybe you already had Lullaby customers doing that, but maybe they're using Tugboat servers with GitHub Actions just like we are, and I misunderstood. So I didn't know. That was just an idea. It was like if we had some way to actually see what was going on there, that might help us. It's a little
Yeah.
bit of a black box at the moment.
Yeah, you know what also might help, Joseph, if we haven't tried this is just trying to make our locals more similar to GitHub. You know, like use the same version of PHP, use a config split or use a split, you know, run them in the split formation, you know, because when I run it locally, I'm just like I just run all the tests or run a group. I don't bother with splitting the sets, the test sets, and maybe that's where the difference is.
Okay. Like I could set up a VM like running Ubuntu 24 and like go to the Shimover scripts and run those.
Oh, you know what else you can do? Um, that seems kind of obvious that I haven't tried is you can install the GitHub CLI and then you can run GitHub Actions locally.
Huh.
So you literally can just point it at our current actions and say run, and then that would give you a nearly identical output locally as we're getting inside of our test runs.
So I just set up an Ubuntu 24 VM, install the GitHub CLI, and then just run the script.
I don't even think you need. So I think that Docker is a prerequisite already
Oh,
of
okay.
the test running infrastructure, and so I think by installing the actions locally, it will spin up the Docker containers that are specified in the action.
Okay. It won't. Okay, that's good.
Okay, hang on. This looks like it might not be a real GitHub supported thing. There's this thing called Act, ACT, that runs things locally. Here's the link. Chat.
Okay.
All right. I love you. Thanks for.
Yeah, that looks like that could really help us a lot. Okay.
Okay.
Something else to try.
Cool.
Okay, let's talk about some other issues here. So, we mentioned this last week or a couple weeks ago. I'm going to share my screen again. Maybe. Here we go. This is great that the designer of Basis, Wes Rubalcaba, is back doing issues for us. And so the very first thing he did is he installed Backdrop, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, the way that the message displays is awful," which I totally
It bothers me every time.
agree. Every
It's like
single
it
time.
looks so bad.
Yeah, the messages on the homepage just look not great. And
Yeah.
so yeah, he filed a pull request. Just when was this? Oh, really recently. He filed a pull request just earlier today.
Question
So
is, does it change CSS? Because if so, we can't do it until Backdrop 2, which is a
well,
problem.
yeah, this is always the thing about like, does it change it in a way that would affect existing sites that have subthemed it? I think that's the
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Changing CSS is possible, but there's a lot of caveats to it, and so yeah,
Only admin
that is kind of
pages,
the question.
or if we accidentally broke something, we fixed it. I think it's all we've done in core so far. Like we did the image alignment thing, which we broke and then we fixed, and that affected the front end of all existing sites. And then we do a lot on the back end.
Yep, good question. Wes might not be aware of this whole
Yeah.
CSS
He might be super
troublesome problem.
motivated to help us figure out how to add CSS to existing core installs, though. He would be really good at that. So maybe I'll point him at
Potentially.
that issue and see what happens.
So anyway, I'm excited about this. I would really love it if this got fixed. This doesn't, if it can be fixed in a compatible way, we can do it in a bug fix release. I kind of wonder like where, like the amount of discussion that's happened in here. It looks like, the whole updating CSS hasn't like come in as a factor here. It's just literally like when we added the cards, the messages started displaying in a not ideal way, and then we just never went back and addressed it.
I don't think it was the cards. I think it's when we placed the messages block instead of having the default that was the problem. And the cards just made it obvious because they added the gray background.
Because the home page has a separate layout now. And
Yeah,
that's
well,
what you're
it has
saying.
a separate block placement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The default layout doesn't, right? Is that still
Yeah,
the case?
I think so.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway, would love to see this fixed. Yeah, Wes's pull request is up there for us to take a look at. All right. This is another interesting topic for discussion that was just brought up. It's a sub issue of this one. So the parent issue is 6423. Text summary returns an empty string with filtered format. I didn't have time to fully parse what's going on in here, even though Indigozella brought it up quite a while ago. It's somehow related to CK editor formats markup, but I'm going to have to think about this to really understand what's going on here. Anyway, this is the parent issue. What I'd like to talk about is the child issue, which is much easier to understand, 6429, which is just out of the box. Leak Soup is suggesting, hey, we should turn off the auto paragraph filter because it's completely silly when using CK editor that we're converting new lines into paragraphs. And for the most part, they don't really conflict too much, but apparently it has something to do with this parent issue 6423, that if we turned it off, that one problem would go away. I still think we need to solve the other problem because people are going to combine AutoP with CK editor anyway, so we need to solve that problem. But it does raise the issue of like, why are we doing this in the first place? AutoP has been on forever, as long as Drupal 7 was around, which didn't have a rich text editor, and then our early versions of Backdrop introduced a rich text editor, but we left AutoP on because there wasn't any foreseen problem with having it on. But why? So yeah, Indigo Zella says that she always turns this off. It's one of the first things she does in every one. And so maybe we should turn it off, as well as filter URL, because when you paste a URL into CK Editor as well, it also converts it into a link automatically. And so both of these filters are not providing a lot of value in our out-of-box configuration. If you're going to be going in and changing your text formats to turn off CK Editor, you're already going to be in the right place to turn back on AutoP. So maybe we need to be thinking about configuring our out-of-box text formats to be the ideal configuration for CK Editor, and yeah, not have on these legacy filters. Anybody have any feedback or thoughts on that? Or does that just sound obvious? All right, I'll take the lack of responses agreement.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know a lot about it, but it seems to me like regular users probably are going to want CK Editor, and it's like a weird subset of people that are like one-offs that know what they're doing, that want these legacy things on.
Yep, I don't even think people that know what they're doing want them on. I think people that know what they're doing turn them off. And it's really the people that don't know what they're doing are left with a situation that might cause them unexpected problems. Because I think when they go into source mode and they start typing in there, that's where you can run into like the weird problems. But CKEditor 5, especially if you start typing into CKEditor 5 source mode and then you switch back to the rich text mode, it's going to automatically modify your markup to make it have P's around the text anyway. It kind of has some equivalent of like auto P just by applying the editor, it applies formatting. It's possible, or I think it'll actually lose, like it won't have the same behavior as auto P where it'll only make a single paragraph, not like a bunch of them for each new line. But it makes it clear that when you're editing in source mode, it's HTML. And when you switch back, it's going to convert that to HTML before it saves the content. So it's almost like with CKEditor, it's pretty much impossible to leverage AutoP at all because CKEditor is going to format it as HTML. And so this filter is never going to have any real effect. Okay, those are the issues that we had brought up for this week. I'll still take a look at the 6423 that needs more thinking, but looks like it also has a pull request that needs review, which is great. Anybody have any other topics or things they'd like to discuss today? Oh, looks like Jen was commenting on the messages issue.
I did. I dropped a link into the supplemental CSS selectors to see if what Wes gets excited about that. But
Yeah, interesting. I've mostly stayed out of this discussion about CSS because I don't honestly know how to handle it either.
that's what I want Wes to look at it. He'll have good ideas.
That issue has caused me to quit using subthemes.
I had one thought about the jQuery thing.
Mhm.
And I know this doesn't quite apply because it's a jQuery is like a very different situation, but I come from a background of working mostly on CiviCRM stuff and maintaining and basing stuff on old deprecated libraries like AngularJS 1 really scares me from a developer's perspective, where you like have new developers coming in and they're like, why I can't like reasonably spend time relearning all of this stuff to use this product. You know, that kind of thing is a little bit scary to me.
So you're suggesting that rather than maintaining and using these libraries, we will get more support if we just stopped using them entirely? Is that the idea?
I think it's something to consider. I think jQuery is much wider, you know, it's much more widely used, so it's not as much of a problem. But somewhere down the road, it could become kind of the same situation where it's like, I can't contribute to most of the CiviCRM stuff anymore because it's like, I'm not going to spend a bunch of my career learning AngularJS 1 right now, you know?
Yeah, that's a big broad question, probably not about these individual jQuery libraries, but about jQuery itself. You know, like, you know, should we continue using jQuery? From the experience that Drupal has had, despite attempting to remove jQuery from everywhere they can over the course of a 10-year period, they're still really far away from actually stopping use of it entirely. And I'm not sure if that means that it's not worth pursuing just because it takes a long time. But yeah, it does kind of give you an idea of exactly how much of an effort it would be to stop using it entirely. That it's just pervasive. I still find that, I mean, this is me, I guess, and that might be the problem, is that um, there's a lot of times when writing JavaScript, even though most of the time I actually try to use vanilla JavaScript most of the time, there's just a lot of situations in which jQuery syntax is still way shorter and more convenient than vanilla JavaScript, even though you can do everything in vanilla JavaScript because it's become highly standardized and well supported across browsers. Sometimes syntactically and for the sake of brevity, jQuery is just a lot shorter and faster. But that's for me. You know, I could see a large audience of upcoming developers not having ever used jQuery, and the mix of, you know, suddenly these weird jQuery things inside of uh, the understandable vanilla JavaScript that they're used to could be detrimental. So I see where you're coming from there.
Yeah, not a strong opinion, but just something to consider.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think on the whole, we've kind of looked at it and just said no, thank you,
I think,
just because of how much of an impact it would have throughout our code base. Go ahead, Joseph.
yeah. So when I'm doing stuff, like if I have to change JavaScript files in core or write new JavaScript, then I try to use vanilla as much as possible. But I do agree with you that like jQuery once, I think, is the big one for me. That is just so much easier to use that than writing my own code to not run something multiple times.
Yep. And like I said, Drupal came up with their own version, vanilla JavaScript version of that. Um, but you know, Drupal, I mean, especially between the 7 and 8 conversion, did a lot of things that just made upgrading freaking impossible. Um, we'd have to take a different approach where we'd end up with two versions for a period of time, you know, where there would be the vanilla JavaScript version and the jQuery version to allow for that conversion.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not exactly sure how long that lifespan would be. You know, if we did that over the entire course of 2.x, for example, might be the way that we would need to do that transition
Right.
if we wanted to pursue it at all. But I think our overall perspective of it's not really feasible to remove jQuery entirely from Backdrop. So, like, why even start that process with something like once?
Yeah. Well, no, no. I think we could. It would just take a lot of work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
We would probably end up writing our own utility library to replace some of those functions.
Yep. And it all comes down to the same question as before, where it's like, you know, why are people, you know, moving back towards like let's write our own libraries that are inside of our own code bases instead of using a shared library that lots of projects could use. And it's kind of a weird regression in the world of JavaScript.
Yeah, I don't really
um,
understand that either. I liked, you know, jQuery. I like using once. It's easy, but people, we have these libraries where people have just left, so maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
yeah, that's I guess that's the question that I'm asking too is like, is that really like the primary reason is that these libraries that everybody was depending on are no longer maintained, and that's the main driver. Maybe it's the secondary driver after, you know, just people don't want to use jQuery anymore.
Mhm.
Well, anyway, we are at the top of the hour and we're out of time for today. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in on these discussions. Thank you to Indigo Zella for, of course, her work as always, but for posting into the forum for the topics for today. If anybody has things they'd like to discuss next week, please use the forum uh, and uh, and post your requests there. And that's it. Thank you so much, everybody. I hope everybody has a great week, and we'll see you on the internet